Hey, if you're enjoying these stories, do me a huge favor and just type "hi" in the comments really quick. It honestly makes a world of difference in helping the YouTube algorithm find more people like us. I love seeing you all here. Richard Richmond flattened himself against the rock wall, feeling the jagged stone dig into his spine through his flimsy shirt. He held his breath, straining his ears. The cave was a cruel joke, barely 10 feet deep, more a dent in the cliffside than a real shelter. Behind him, in the pitch black, a single drop of water echoed, its steady plink, plink, plink keeping time with the frantic pounding of his heart. Outside, the jungle was a symphony of alien noise. Bugs as big as his hand buzzed and clicked from unseen branches. Things that sounded vaguely like birds screeched in the canopy. And something huge was out there. Something that snapped tree limbs as thick as his thigh as it bulldozed its way through the undergrowth. And mixed into that terrifying chaos, he knew the hunters were searching for him. Richard screwed his eyes shut, trying to force his pulse to slow down. He was 19. He'd had his 19th birthday just 3 weeks ago on the transport ship that ferried him to this nightmare world. His buddy Marco had managed to swipe a processed protein cake and stuck a frayed bit of wiring in it for a candle. They'd actually managed to smile. Marco was dead now. So were Rachel, Claude, and Danny. All of them. He peeled his eyes open again, gazing out into the jungle. It looked like a fever dream painted in shades of deep green, inky black, and a sick, glowing red where volcanic fissures vented steam, bleeding a blistering heat into the soupy air. The humidity was a physical weight, a wet wool blanket trying to suffocate him with every painful breath. His thoughts reeled back to Rachel. She was the first to go. The 5 of them had been ejected from the transport pod like a sack of unwanted mail. No gear, no weapons, not even a single word about what was happening. Just the clothes on their backs and the sheer panic in their eyes. Rachel, who was a pre-med student back on Earth, had been trying to be the calm one. She kept telling them to just breathe, to think. She took 3 steps forward, pushed aside a leaf the size of a car door, and a silent beam of searing white light burned a hole clean through her torso. Richard didn't even see where it came from. 1 second she was there, trying to be brave. The next, a perfectly circular, cauterized wound the size of a fist was sizzling where her heart had been, and she was just collapsing. She never even made a sound. She just folded to the forest floor like a puppet with its strings cut. And then high in the trees they heard the laughter. It was a guttural barking noise, like a pack of hyenas gargling gravel. A moment later, a voice buzzed through the air, distorted by some low-grade translation tech. "And we have our first elimination. The female. A little anticlimactic. I was hoping for more of a chase." In that single, horrifying moment, Richard got it. This wasn't a rescue mission gone wrong. It was a blood sport, a TV show, and they were the entertainment. They ran. Marco, the natural leader, took the lead. Claude, the big guy, he'd played linebacker in college, tried to cover their escape. Danny was right in the middle, sobbing, but still moving his legs on pure instinct, too terrified to stop. Richard just ran, his brain a complete blank, just an empty vessel watching his own feet slap against the wet earth, one after the other. He knew if he let himself think about Rachel, about her lying on the ground back there, he'd freeze. And freezing out here was a death sentence. Claude made it to day 2. They had found a little creek and were following it, clinging to the desperate hope it might lead to civilization. For a brief couple of hours, as the jungle thinned slightly, Richard had allowed himself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could get out of this alive. Then Claude was just gone. 1 minute he was right there, his massive frame plowing through the ferns. The next, he was just gone. The forest floor had literally opened up and swallowed him whole. It was a pit trap, a good 20 feet down, masterfully concealed with a blanket of leaves and dirt. It was designed for something enormous. Richard belly crawled to the lip of the hole and looked in, and his stomach instantly tried to crawl up his throat. At the bottom wasn't just some animal. It was a writhing mass of claws and fangs and pure rage. Its skin was a sickly pale white in the dim light, and Claude was letting out a scream so inhuman Richard didn't know a person could make it. And then it was over. The hunters laughed again. One of them materialized on a branch above the pit, calmly recording the whole thing with a little floating camera bot. It was tall and spindly, with tough grayish-brown skin and 4 long fingers on each hand. Its eyes had a soft glow, tracking their body heat. "The big one," the translator crackled. "Now that was much better. A worthy struggle." They lost Marco and Danny on the 3rd day. Marco was convinced their only chance was to fight. He'd found a narrow ravine, and they'd spent hours rigging a deadfall with a huge log and a pile of rocks. It was a pathetic plan, and Richard knew it, but at least it was something other than running. The hunters strolled right into their ambush like they were bored. And they probably were. A shimmering net of what looked like woven energy dropped from above, instantly cocooning Marco and Danny. The moment it touched their skin, it tightened, slamming them to the ground, completely immobilized. Richard was hidden behind a massive fallen log, frozen stiff with terror, as 4 of the hunters casually emerged from the trees. They didn't make it quick. They savored it, circling their trapped friends, prodding them with the tips of their energy lances. One of the hunters was giving a running commentary into its device, while another directed the camera bot for the best angles. "We're down to 2 contestants now. This one's putting up a good fight. The audience will love that. His friend is hiding nearby. We'll let him watch. It heightens the tension." And Richard watched. He watched them torture his friends while his brain screamed at him to do something, anything, even just run out there and die with them. But his body was locked down. Some deep animal part of him had taken the controls, forcing him to survive. He watched them murder his last 2 friends, and he didn't move a muscle. That was 2 days ago. Now he was alone, cowering in a useless hole in a rock, listening to the sounds of the jungle, knowing the hunters were getting closer, knowing their cameras were rolling, and knowing that on 100 different worlds, millions of beings were tuned into a live stream, probably betting on how many more minutes he'd last. He knew he couldn't stay put. This cave was just a tomb he hadn't been sealed in yet. There was no food, no fresh water, and it offered 0 protection from the multi-limbed horrors he'd seen skittering through the shadows last night. The hunters didn't even have to do anything. The planet itself would kill him for them. Richard staggered to his feet, every muscle in his body shrieking. 3 days of running on nothing but fear and an empty stomach had left him dangerously weak. The world tilted and went fuzzy. The crushing air, thick with the sulfur smell from the vents, made him feel like he was being slow roasted and drowned at the same time. He stared out at the chaos of green, black, and burning red. He took a single step out of the cave, and the heat slapped him across the face. The rising sun was already turning the jungle into a pressure cooker. He had no strategy. He just picked a direction and started walking. He didn't run. Running was what they wanted. It was part of the show. Walking let him check his footing, scan for traps, and hoard the tiny bit of energy he had left. Not that it would change the outcome. He knew exactly how this ended. It took them less than an hour to catch up. He'd covered maybe a mile, trying to stay on a high ridge where the trees were a little thinner. His throat felt like it was lined with broken glass. His feet were a raw, pulpy mess of burst blisters. The edges of his vision kept going dark, and he'd have to lean against a tree trunk until the world came back into focus. That's when he heard it. That sick, barking laugh from directly above. Richard tilted his head back. 4 of them were perched in the branches, forming a perfect circle around him. Their mottled gray-brown hides were excellent camouflage against the bark, but he could see the faint glow of their eyes, all locked on his heat signature. The little camera bot floated down to hover right in front of his face. "Our final survivor has been located," the robotic voice announced. "A run of 4 days. Quite respectable. Excellent ratings. The hunt is officially over." In that exact moment, something inside Richard didn't just break. It completely disintegrated. It wasn't bravery that took over. It was the absolute final shred of denial, the last mental shield he had left. And with it gone, he ran. Not away from them, not toward safety. He just ran because his body refused to give them the satisfaction of a stationary kill. He could hear them behind him, moving through the trees with an easy, almost lazy grace. This was the grand finale, the climax of the episode. This was the money shot. Richard crashed through a wall of hanging vines and his feet hit loose gravel, sending him skidding to a heart-stopping halt. He was on the very edge of a colossal cliff. What would you do if you saw your only son being hunted down and murdered on an alien pay-per-view channel? Would you fall apart? Would you rage at the heavens, or would you do what Samuel Richmond did? He sat perfectly still in a small cabin deep in the Alaskan wilderness and just watched. If you want to see what happens when you finally wake a sleeping giant, you're going to want to stick around. Because some men, when you push them too far, don't just get mad. They get even on a galactic scale. Imagine watching your child's final moments on a flickering 20-inch screen. That was Samuel's reality. His son, Richard, was cornered on a cliff's edge, a 100-foot drop to a black, churning river below. A pack of tall, gray-skinned hunters spread out before him, their energy spears crackling with power. They weren't in a hurry. They were enjoying this. A drone hovered inches from Richard's face, broadcasting his fear to billions. The lead hunter's voice, a cold, synthesized mockery, echoed from the speakers. "Got any last words, little human? The viewers just love a good final speech." Richard's voice was barely a whisper, but it was filled with an unbreakable defiance. "My father," he said, his chin held high. "My father will come for you." The alien hunter just threw its head back and laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Your father is galaxies away, kid. He's going to live out his pathetic little life on his backwater planet, wondering what ever happened to his boy. On his knees in a dusty cabin, Samuel's hands slowly curled into fists. He knew that look on his son's face. It was the same stubborn pride he'd had since he was a kid, the kind that never, ever backed down. The hunter lifted its spear. A blinding flash of white, and Richard's body crumpled to the ground. But the show didn't end. For 3 agonizing minutes, stats rolled across the screen, viewer counts, survival time. The hunters even gave a post-hunt interview, laughing about the chase. Samuel watched every single second, silent and still. When the screen finally went black, the only sound was the steady, calm rhythm of his own heartbeat. A chilling quiet fell over him, and deep inside that silence, something that had been dormant for 20 years began to stir. He wasn't just seeing the son he adored. He was seeing a whole universe of shared moments being snuffed out for entertainment. He remembered Richard, just 12 years old, flying up to Alaska for his first summer after the divorce. They'd sit on the porch for hours, saying nothing, just watching the sun bleed out behind the mountains. He could practically smell the sizzle of the elk steaks his boy loved, cooked over a campfire while he spun tales about tracking grizzlies through the woods. Richard was never much of a hunter himself, but he loved that wild, quiet place. It's where they found each other, father and son, far from the rest of the world. But that quiet was shattered now, replaced by the ringing echo of his son's final words. "My father will find you." Samuel stared at his own reflection in the dark screen and saw a man he barely recognized. The eyes staring back were hard, cold, and stripped of everything except a single burning purpose. He made a promise to that reflection, a vow that would cross the stars. "That's right," he whispered. "I will." And with that promise, a year-long transformation began. Samuel wasn't just a grieving dad anymore. He was a weapon being forged. He got his hands on the leaked broadcast file, and it became his holy book. He broke down every single frame, studying the alien terrain, the plants, the bizarre weather. He learned his enemies were called the Verath, a species that worshipped the thrill of the hunt. The network that broadcasted this sick game was run by giant slug-like creatures called the Kethvari, who had built an empire on pain. They targeted species like humans, those who weren't yet part of any galactic protection treaty. Samuel committed it all to memory, their hunting grounds, their shipping lanes, their entire twisted business. He was no longer a hunting guide. He was a predator studying a new kind of prey. Then came the punishing physical work. Samuel was 46, a former Army grunt with a bum knee from a training mishap 15 years back. Guiding tourists kept him fit, but not ready for war, so he started running through waist-deep snow. He'd break through the ice on the lake and swim until his skin was blue. He drove his body past the screaming agony in his knee, telling himself that pain was just a signal. And slowly, the old skills came rushing back. How to move without a sound, how to set a lethal trap, how to fight with a blade. He wasn't just getting in shape, he was sharpening himself into a deadly tool. He sold everything. The cabin he built with his own hands, the truck, the guiding business he'd poured his life into for 15 years. His entire world was liquidated into untraceable crypto. But with that small fortune, he didn't buy weapons or armor. He bought things that wouldn't draw attention. top-of-the-line survival gear, compact multi-tools, a military-grade med kit, and advanced water purifier. He bought the things that would keep him alive long enough to see his promise through. 11 months after watching his son die, Samuel Richmond purchased a one-way ticket to a grimy outpost on the edge of the galaxy called Kepler's Reach, the kind of place you go to disappear for good. For 2 solid weeks, he played the part of a broken old man at the end of his rope. He haunted the seediest bars, the ones with cheap booze and patrons who didn't ask questions. He sat alone, paid his tabs in cash, and made damn sure everyone saw him as a washed-up nobody with nothing left to lose. He was making himself into the perfect bait, and it only took 15 days for the predators to start circling. The traffickers who supplied the HFY with new contestants were professionals. They tailed him for 3 days, making sure he was a ghost, confirming that no one on Earth would ever file a missing persons report. Samuel felt their eyes on him the whole time. He gave them exactly the show they wanted to see, an easy mark. A lonely, vulnerable man worth far more as cargo than as a customer. They made their move on a Thursday night in a dark, grimy alley. 3 local thugs. Before Samuel could even fake being surprised, a neural stunner hit him square in the chest. He could have laid all 3 of them out before they even knew what was happening. A quick, brutal lesson in the dark. But that was never the plan. For him, winning didn't mean winning some alley fight. It meant this. He let his muscles go slack, a willing package. He let them drag his limp body into the shadows, his mind as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. This wasn't him being captured. This was him infiltrating. The hunters had stolen his son's life. Now he was coming for theirs. He was going to burn their entire sick world to the ground from the inside. He had made a promise, and Samuel Richmond always kept his promises. You had to hand it to them. They were thorough. For 3 straight days, they were on him, confirming he had no ties, no one who would notice when he vanished. Samuel knew they were there, and he played his part perfectly. The washed-up, lonely traveler was an irresistible target. They finally cornered him in a pitch-black alley behind the bar. 3 local thugs on the HFY payroll. The neural stunner dropped him before he could even register a look of surprise. It would have been easy to take them all down. But he simply let his body go limp, a dead weight they dragged away into the night. He let them throw him into a shipping container with 6 other terrified people. There were a couple of colonists who'd made the mistake of traveling alone, a family of 3 being sold to clear a debt, and a young man, not much older than Richard, who kept whispering, "This can't be real." Samuel remained silent. The ship took off, entering the strange, deadened silence of faster-than-light travel. In the complete darkness, surrounded by the sounds of quiet sobbing, Samuel just closed his eyes and counted the days. It had been 14 months since he watched his son die. It had been 2 weeks since he'd let them take him. Soon, the transport slammed back into real space, and the planet Quiet Morning appeared in the small viewport, a vicious-looking world of green, brown, and black, scarred with the angry red lines of ancient lava flows. It was the kind of beautiful that promised a very ugly death. The entire ship shuddered as it tore through the atmosphere. The other captives huddled together, their fear so palpable you could almost choke on it. The young man who thought it was all a mistake had gone completely quiet, his face a hollow mask. Samuel just kept his eyes glued to the jungle rushing up to meet them. The ship didn't land. It just slowed, hovering over a clearing as the cargo bay doors groaned open, flooding the hold with hot, humid air that stank of sulfur and rot. A robotic voice boomed, "Welcome to Quiet Morning. You have been chosen for our premium entertainment package." Imagine you're told the only rule is to survive, because your life is now a reality show, and the hunters will be released in exactly 1 hour. What would you do? That was the nightmare facing the people now being shoved out the door. Some were so paralyzed by shock they just stumbled out, while others had to be dragged, kicking and screaming. One man clung to the door frame, yelling that this was impossible. A guard just zapped him with an electric prod, and he tumbled 20 feet to the jungle floor. But Samuel walked calmly to the edge. He glanced down at the others scattering into the trees in a blind panic. And then he looked up to a high ridge in the distance, and he saw them, the spectators. The Vareth hunters were lined up and amped up for the slaughter. Tiny camera drones hovered everywhere, already broadcasting the whole sick show across the galaxy. And that's when Samuel leaped. He refused to give them the satisfaction of a push. He hit the ground like a professional, bending his knees to soak up the shock. The first thing that hit him was the heat. A thick, wet blanket trying to smother him. The humidity was so intense it felt like he was breathing soup. All around him, the other humans were falling apart, sobbing, screaming prayers, or just running in circles. The kid who'd tried to fight back was still twitching on the ground. Samuel rose to his feet, deliberately slow. He took in the jungle, a living nightmare of greens, blacks, and splashes of crimson. A perfect match for the video. A perfect match for the last thing his son ever saw. He knew the hunters were watching. He could feel their alien eyes on his back and saw the little drone swivel to frame his face. They were waiting for the terror to set in, for him to break and run like the rest. But Samuel didn't budge. He just calmly brushed the grime from his pants, rolled his shoulders, and took a long, steady breath of the foul, sulfur-tinged air. Then he started walking toward the wall of trees. He wasn't in a hurry. He moved with a purpose, like a man taking a morning walk who knew his destination by heart. He could hear their strange language crackling from the ridge above. They were confused. This wasn't in the script. This was something new. And for their audience, it was about to be a hell of a broadcast. As Samuel Richmond vanished into the jungle, a single thought echoed in his mind. I'm home. The headhunter Korvax had claimed 47 human lives. He was damn proud of that number. All the veteran hunters kept a tally. It was their version of a high score, a sick badge of honor they'd boast about at the end of every hunting season. 47 kills in just 6 years. Every single one was recorded, cataloged, and sold to millions of depraved viewers across the stars. Humans were his specialty. Some of the other hunters went for the big game with tough hides. It made for a more dramatic kill. Others preferred to hunt in packs, tricking their prey with ease. But Korvax? He'd found his calling hunting people early on and never looked back. Humans were just so breakable. Their bodies were soft and tore apart so easily, but their minds shattered even quicker. Most of them spent their final hours on this planet, weeping, pleading, or praying to gods that weren't listening. And the viewers ate it up. That kind of raw, pathetic fear was a guaranteed bestseller. But humans were also unpredictable, which is what kept the job interesting. They never reacted the same way twice. Some would just sprint until their hearts gave out. Others would try to hide until they starved. Every once in a while, a handful would try to fight back with pointy sticks and rocks, which always gave the team a good laugh. And on a rare occasion, you'd get one who actually tried to set their own traps. Those were the hunts that became legends. Korvac stood on the ridge, watching his newest batch of 8 humans scatter into the jungle below. It was a standard drop. The camera drones were already fanning out, programmed to capture every single horrifying moment. Initial scatter is complete, his spotter Vin reported from the drone command station. 7 of the targets are moving predictably. But we've got one anomaly. That word snapped Korvac's to attention. Anomaly? Vin brought up a holographic screen showing a live feed of an older human male who was just walking, casually strolling into the dense woods without a single look over his shoulder. He looked like he was out on a Sunday hike. "This one," Vin said, tapping the screen. "His stress indicators are minimal. No panic response. Heart rate is up, yeah, but it's controlled. He's been on the ground for 6 minutes and hasn't broken his stride." Korvac narrowed his eyes at the image. The man was definitely older than their usual prey, maybe in his mid-40s. He had a weathered face and hands that looked like they'd seen a lifetime of hard work. The way he moved through the tangled jungle, so smooth and efficient, it screamed experience. "Pull up his file," Korvac grunted. Vin tapped on his data pad. "Nabbed on a remote colony called Kepler's Reach. No military record. His job is listed as a hunting guide. Planet of origin, Earth. A hunter." Korvac made a dry, grinding sound that was his species' version of a chuckle. "How perfect," he sneered. "Well, at least he'll understand what's happening to him. That always makes it better. The fear is so much sweeter when they understand the game." "Should we tag him as the priority target?" Vin asked. Korvac thought about it. The audience had certain expectations. You had to deliver a couple of quick, easy kills right off the bat to get the adrenaline pumping. Then you'd draw out a few longer chases to build the suspense, all leading up to the main event. You always saved the best for last. This guy could be an amazing finale. No, Korvac decided. Let him settle in. Let him think his pathetic little bit of Earth experience gives him an edge. We'll pick off the easy ones first and save him for day 3 or 4. By then, he'll know his skills mean nothing here. Vin nodded and started redirecting the drones. The ridge was buzzing with activity as the hunting party prepped their gear. There were 6 of them in all. Korvac, the leader, Vin on drones, and 3 shooters named Dren, Salk, and Matic, who handled the messy parts. And then there was Brennan, the rookie, stuck hauling gear and running a backup camera. It was a standard crew, more than enough to deal with 8 fragile humans. Korvac checked his weapons, feeling that familiar thrill start to burn in his gut. The hunt was on. Down in the jungle, the game was already beginning to end for some. Samuel Richmond had been on the ground for 2 hours. In that time, He'd already paced out about 3 kilometers, located 4 sources of clean water, identified 6 different kinds of edible plants, and found the main game trail used by the planet's apex predators. He'd also counted 18 camera drones. They were flying in lazy, predictable, overlapping patterns. Most of the drones were tailing the other captives, filming their frantic scramble through the jungle. But a few had already broken off to lock onto Samuel, keeping a cautious distance while they recorded his weirdly calm behavior for the folks back home. He let them watch. Crouching by a creek, Samuel crafted a water bottle from a massive leaf, expertly folding it and sealing the seams with a sticky resin from a nearby tree. The water was a bit warm and had a faint acidic taste, but it was safe. He knew he'd need a better source later on, maybe from one of the volcanic springs he'd read about, but this would work for now. He was building a 3D map in his head. The jungle was dense, but it wasn't random. Animal trails acted like natural highways through the thickest parts of the brush. The volcanic mountains to the north created distinct zones, cooler pockets near the thermal vents with their own unique vegetation, and dangerously hot spots where the ground itself could flash cook you. To the south and west was just endless flat jungle. And to the east, based on what he'd glimpsed from the ship, a massive river sliced through a deep canyon. He had choices, a lot of them. Samuel started moving north, but not for the high ground, not yet. The first order of business was to observe. He knew the hunters had every advantage. They had better tech, more bodies, and they knew this planet. But any strength can be turned into a weakness if you know how to look at it. Take the camera drones, for instance. They were top of the line, almost silent, and could track your heat signature from the sky. But in the end, they were just machines following an algorithm. They flew the same predictable routes at the same predictable intervals, leaving massive gaps in their coverage. The kinds of gaps a smart, patient man could slip right through. Samuel had been studying their flight paths for 2 hours straight. He'd already charted 3 major blind spots within a kilometer of where he stood. He knew the hunters were watching him, sure, but not closely. Not yet. They were busy having fun with the easy targets, the ones who ran and screamed and made for great television. In the last hour alone, Samuel had heard 2 different screams get cut off mid-shriek. 2 down. That left 6 of them, including him. He knew they'd come for him eventually. As soon as the cheap thrills were over, and the broadcast needed a new storyline, they'd focus on the strange old man who wouldn't run. And Samuel planned on being more than ready when they did. An hour later, he found what he was looking for, a patch of jungle where the canopy was so thick it choked out the light, creating a dark, twisted maze of shadows and vines. The ground was a minefield of gnarled roots and hidden sinkholes. Better still, a huge local predator had marked the area as its personal hunting ground. It was absolutely perfect. And there, in the suffocating darkness, Samuel got to work. "He's doing nothing," the tracker, Vin, radioed to Korvax. "Been planted in that same spot for the past hour. Hasn't so much as twitched. No shelter, no fire. He's just sitting there." On the monitor, Korvax leaned in. The drone's thermal feed showed the old man as a dull, warm smudge against the jungle floor. "Maybe he broke," Dren, a shooter, said with a smirk, wiping down his rifle. "Happens to the old ones. Their minds just snap and they wait for us to finish it." "His vitals tell a different story," Vin countered. Heart rate's elevated, but it's rock solid. The guy's alert. He's watching. Dren laughed. Watching what? Vin didn't have a response. Korvax didn't say a word, his eyes locked on the screen, a strange feeling of doubt creeping into the command tent. They decided he was a lost cause, a man so broken by terror he'd become a living statue in the middle of the jungle, an easy target they could clean up later. It was a fatal miscalculation. They were convinced he was the hunted, but they had it all wrong. He was the hunter, patiently waiting for his prey to walk right into his trap. And they were the ones in the crosshairs. If you think you see where this is going, trust me, you don't. Stay right here, and I'll show you what real vengeance is all about. Forgetting the old man, they turned their drones toward a much more entertaining target, a 22-year-old kid named Eric Brandt. He was a college student, grabbed on his way to see his sister. 3 kilometers south, he was sobbing as he tripped through a murky swamp. Now that was the kind of high-stakes drama their viewers paid to see. The hunt leader, Korvax, geared up his team to give the audience a performance they wouldn't forget. Wrong place, wrong time, Eric kept muttering, the words tumbling out of him. He'd practically fallen on top of Samuel near a geothermal vent, a pocket of warmth where the sulfur smell was so strong it could hide a man from the hunter's senses. The kid was a wreck. His eyes were huge with fear, and the second he saw another human, the words just poured out of him. "Oh, thank God," Eric gasped, clutching Samuel's arm like a lifeline. I thought they got everyone else, that I was the last one. We need to team up. We gotta figure a way out. My sister, she's expecting me. She has no idea any of this is even happening." Samuel remained perfectly still, listening, taking in the kid's condition. He was running on empty, thirsty, and a nasty cut sliced across his forehead from some thorny branch. Eric's hands trembled, his gaze constantly jumping to the canopy, scanning for the telltale glint of the drones he knew were up there. Alone, he wouldn't make it through another night. "Please," Eric begged, his voice breaking. "You seem like you know this place. You're not freaking out like the others were. Just help me. Please, I just want to get home." Samuel looked at the young man and saw the whole story, the primal terror warring with a tiny spark of hope. And in that moment, the face in front of him wasn't Eric's anymore. It was his son, Richard. He saw Richard feeling this same crushing fear, desperately searching for a friendly face, for any hope in this televised hell. But Richard had found no one. And somewhere deep inside Samuel, a part of his soul he thought had been permanently frozen over began to crack. "What's your name?" Samuel asked, his voice gravelly from lack of use. "Eric. My name's Eric Brandt." Samuel nodded slowly. "Okay, Eric. I need you to listen very carefully. You're going to travel east. In about 5 kilometers, you'll hit a river. Follow it down, but stay off the banks. Keep to the trees no matter what. The canyon walls there will mess with the drone's visuals." He dug into a pouch and pulled out a few dirt-caked roots, pushing them into Eric's shaky hands. "These are edible. They'll keep you going. Only drink water that's moving fast and looks crystal clear. When the sun is directly overhead, you hide and rest. You only move when the sun is rising and when it's setting. Their thermal scanners will have a harder time picking you up." Eric looked at the muddy roots in his hand as if they were treasure. You're coming too, right?" Eric asked, his voice almost inaudible. "I don't want to be alone out here." Every fiber of Samuel's being wanted to say yes, to guard this boy, to give him the shot his own son never got, to be the savior Richard deserved. But he couldn't. Helping Eric escape meant giving up his entire reason for being on this godforsaken rock. It meant the hunters would win, Korvax would get away clean, the whole disgusting show would go on, broadcasting people's final panicked breaths for entertainment. More sons would be taken. Saving Eric meant condemning countless others. "I can't," Samuel finally said, the words feeling like poison in his throat. "There's something I came here to do. Something that could end this. For good." Eric's hope visibly deflated, but a flicker of understanding crossed to his face. "Go east," Samuel repeated, his hand firm on the kid's shoulder. "Stay sharp, stay silent, and you live, Eric. That's how you beat them." Then he turned and walked north without another word. He heard Eric call out to him once, then again, but the jungle quickly muffled the sound as the boy started his journey east, clinging to that fragile thread of hope. Samuel didn't turn around. He told himself he'd given the kid a real shot. The path was sound, the plan was good. But Samuel had been a hunter for 30 years. He knew how this game was played, and he knew that sometimes your best laid plans are just not enough. Just as night began to fall, the hunters cornered Eric Brandt by the river. About 2 kilometers away, Samuel sat perched in a tree, watching the whole thing through a pair of high-powered binoculars. He was too far to see their faces, but the sounds carried clearly on the evening air. The screams. The kid lasted longer than Samuel thought he would. A good 3, maybe 4 minutes. It was clear the hunters were enjoying themselves, putting on a show for the viewers back home. Samuel could hear their harsh guttural laughs bouncing off the canyon walls, their taunts, and then silence. He lowered the binoculars, climbed down, and returned to his task. By his count, that left 4 of them in the game, himself and 3 other poor souls still running around this jungle. The hunters would probably spend the next day mopping them up, which gave him exactly the time he needed. The trap was an old classic, a design he used to demonstrate for tourists back home in Alaska. A simple deadfall. A massive log, balanced just so, connected to a tripwire, but this one had a few personal touches. The wire wasn't near the ground where you'd expect it. He'd strung it up at knee level, making it look exactly like the countless other vines hanging in the dense air. The release was all wood and tension, a purely mechanical system that would give off 0 electronic signals for their scanners to find. He'd set it up in a natural funnel between 2 towering rock faces, the only sensible way for a tracker to follow the path he'd deliberately left heading north. And that log wasn't just for crushing. Samuel had spent the better part of the afternoon fashioning crude but effective spikes from hardwood branches and driving them into the log's belly. When it dropped, it wouldn't just break bones. It would spear whatever was unfortunate enough to be underneath. He knew it probably wouldn't be a fatal blow. Their species was notoriously tough, but it would be enough to injure one, to trap it, and the sound of the fall, followed by the screams, would act as a dinner bell for every hungry creature Samuel had been listening to for the past 2 days. The jungle itself would finish the job. He gave the trigger one last look, then faded into the trees, scaling a trunk about 50 meters away to settle in and wait. The night air was thick with the sounds of clicks, chirps, and the far-off growl of things that hunted in the dark. The brutal heat of the day finally broke, but the air remained thick and wet, clinging to his skin like a damp shroud. Samuel shut his eyes, not to sleep, but to enter a state of heightened listening he'd mastered back in the service. It saved his strength, but left his senses on high alert. Patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon, and Samuel was armed to the teeth. Right on schedule, at first light, the trap went off. The sound was unmistakable, a loud snap of wood under pressure, a bone-jarring whump of the log hitting the ground, followed by a piercing shriek, a shriek that belonged to nothing from earth. Samuel was moving before the echo faded, a ghost slipping through the undergrowth. The early morning sun cut through the thick fog rising from the damp ground. He reached the trap in less than 60 seconds. Just as planned, one of the hunters was writhing on the ground, pinned by the deadfall. This one looked younger than the others. 3 of his wooden spikes had gone clean through its body, and a dark, sludgy blood was pooling beneath it. Its high-tech spear lay just out of reach, and its wrist comm was a mess of sparks and shattered plastic. The alien's eyes widened in shock as a human shape stepped out of the morning mist. It tried to yell, maybe a warning to its friends, but all that came out was a wet, choking sound as more of that dark fluid bubbled from its mouth. Samuel stood over the creature, his face a complete blank. The hunter's damaged translator crackled. "Help me." Samuel knelt, not to help, but to inspect the heavy log pinning the creature. He then calmly picked up its spear and tossed it deeper into the jungle. He began searching its pack, pulling out water purification tabs, a medical kit, and a nasty-looking knife with a serrated edge, the kind you use to take a souvenir. The hunter watched, the arrogance in its eyes slowly being replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. "You," it managed to rasp. "This was a setup. You planned this whole thing." The alien hunter finally met Samuel's eyes. "His name was Richard," Samuel said, his voice quiet and as cold as a tomb. "He was my son. You hunted him down last season. You filmed it for entertainment and showed it to the entire galaxy." Realization, followed by pure, unfiltered terror, washed over the hunter's face. "No. Wait, that wasn't me. I had nothing to do with that hunt." Samuel calmly picked up the hunter's own trophy knife from the ground. "You're all part of the same sick game," he said. "This is what your kind does, isn't it? You take little souvenirs from your victims." The hunter started making a pathetic, high-pitched whining sound, desperately trying to crawl away from the man now looming over him with his own blade. It was a miserable sound, somewhere between a whimper and a sob, that its own translation device couldn't quite figure out. "I'm going to give you a choice," Samuel stated, his tone completely flat. "You're going to tell me everything about your hunting party. I want every name, their jobs, your patrol schedules, how many of you there are, where you sleep, and how you talk to each other. Give me all of it, and I'll make sure your end comes quickly." The hunter just stared at him, mouth hanging open. "And if I don't?" it stammered. Samuel glanced out into the dark jungle. The predators of the night were starting to quiet down as dawn approached, but they were still out there. He could see something big moving in the shadows, drawn in by the smell of blood. "Then I'm just going to walk away and leave you here," Samuel said. "Those creatures you guys brought to this planet to make the hunts more exciting? I've been watching them. There's a pack that hunts using scent, and they're less than half a mile east of us right now. They'll find you in less than an hour." The hunter's breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. "You're crazy. You're the one being hunted. The prey is supposed to run and hide until we find it. That's how this works." "I'm not the prey," Samuel said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm the hunter now. And every single one of you made a deadly mistake." "What mistake?" Samuel leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You hunted the wrong man's son." The alien, whose name turned out to be Brennan, spilled everything. As the rookie of the team, he was on his second season and mostly just filmed their twisted sport, rarely getting to participate in an actual kill. He knew every single detail Samuel wanted: their procedures, radio channels, patrol routes, and the location of their base camp on the eastern ridge. He also confirmed that the hunt for a human named Richard last season was led by the pack leader himself, an alien named Korvax. Samuel memorized every word, firing off sharp questions to get every last detail. When Brennan was done, he looked up at Samuel with a pathetic shred of hope in his eyes. "Our deal," he rasped. "You promised. You said it would be quick." Samuel gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then he turned around and simply walked away into the jungle. Behind him, Brennan's voice erupted in a torrent of shrieks, curses, and desperate pleas. His translator device spat it all out in a flat, robotic tone that did zero justice to the absolute horror in his voice. Samuel didn't even break his stride. The scavengers were already on their way. The smell of blood was like a dinner bell echoing through the trees, calling in anything with sharp teeth and an empty stomach. By the time the other hunters noticed their rookie had missed his scheduled check-in, there wouldn't be enough of him left to even recognize. Samuel moved like a phantom through the jungle, heading east. He had a name now: Korvax. He had a location: the Eastern Ridge. And he had the start of a plan. The hunters had no clue what was about to come down on them. Miles away on an observation ridge, a tracker named Ven was getting a bad feeling. "Brennan's gone dark," he said to Korvax. "His signal just vanished about 6 hours ago. Could just be a busted radio." Korvax hardly bothered to look up. "What was his last position?" "The northern sector. He was tracking that weird one, the older human who won't run." "Send Dren to check it out," Korvax ordered. "It's probably just a broken comms unit, but I want to be certain." Ven passed on the order, and Dren dropped down into the jungle below, his high-tech spear at the ready. The audience watching from home would love this. A brave hunter heading out to rescue his lost teammate. It made for great TV. Korvax turned his attention back to the main screens. There were only 3 human targets left. The strange old one had disappeared somewhere in the northern jungle. The other 2 were still on the move. One was heading south toward the volcanic fields, and the other was looping back toward the place they first landed. It was all predictable, textbook stuff, and to be honest, it was getting a little boring. He was really hoping the strange one would put on a better show. But right now, the older human was completely off the grid. Drones were sweeping the area, but their sensors were coming up with absolutely nothing, just miles and miles of empty jungle. No heat signals, no movement. It was like he'd just vanished into thin air. Korvax felt a tiny, nagging flicker of unease, but he pushed it away. The human was just hiding. That's all it was. Prey hides. It's what they do. Sooner or later he'd have to make a move. The cameras would find him, and the hunt would go on just like it always does. There was nothing special about this human, nothing to worry about. Dren found the trap site about an hour after the sun came up. It was a small clearing, not even 30 feet across, walled in on two sides by jagged volcanic rock. Beams of morning sunlight cut through the trees, lighting up a scene that sent a chill down his spine. The huge log from a deadfall trap was lying on the ground, stained dark with dried blood, alien blood. Dren knew the color, the smell, and the way it soaked into the ground, turning the dirt black. 3 sharpened wooden stakes were sticking out from the bottom of the log. 2 of them were snapped off at the base, but there was no body. Darren did a slow, cautious circle around the area, spear held tight, his eyes scanning every shadow. The ground told a horrifying story. He could see deep indentations where something heavy had been crushed. He saw drag marks leading off toward the eastern trees. He saw broken pieces of hunting equipment scattered around. And he saw tracks. Not alien tracks, but the tracks of something else. A lot of something else's, all coming to this one spot from all directions. Scavengers, the jungle's cleanup crew, drawn in by the promise of a free meal. They had gotten to Brennan long before he had. Dren switched on his comms. "Pack leader, I'm at the location." Korvax's voice crackled back immediately. "Report." It was a trap. A deadfall rigged with stakes. Brennan must have walked right into it. There's blood everywhere, but his body is gone. The scavengers got him. A long, tense silence filled the line. "A trap," Korvax finally said, his voice completely empty of emotion. "Are you telling me Brennan was taken out by a trap?" "That's what it looks like. Brennan was a professional. He knew this jungle like the back of his hand. He would never fall for some crude trap made by a panicked animal." Dren looked again at the sharpened stakes, the perfectly hidden tripwire, and how the kill zone was placed exactly where a tracker would naturally step. "This wasn't some sloppy trap made out of fear," he said slowly. "Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing." Another pause, even longer this time. "Get back to base. Now. We'll figure this out here." The line went dead. Dren took one last look around the bloody scene. The blood, the drag marks, the stakes that had been carved with such patient, deadly skill. A deep coldness settled into his bones. He turned and started the long walk back to the ridge. He didn't make it very far. Samuel had been following Dren for the last 2 hours. It had been shockingly easy. The alien hunter moved with a cocky self-assurance, sticking to the obvious animal trails and occasionally checking his scanner. He was good, a professional, no doubt, but he was looking for prey. For something scared and running and trying to hide. He wasn't looking for another predator. Samuel stayed a steady 50 yards behind him, using the jungle itself as cover. The forest was filled with places to hide, toppled trees, rocky overhangs, and thick patches of brush that muffled every sound. He only moved when Dren moved and froze solid when Dren stopped, perfectly matching his pace. It was all about being patient. The aliens had all the technology, sensors, scanners, and radios that could call for backup in an instant. A head-on attack was a death sentence. Samuel knew he had to get in close without being seen. He had to make his move before Dren even knew the rules of the game had changed. He just needed to wait for the perfect moment. And then he saw it. Dren stopped at the edge of a stream to check his scanner and figure out his route back to camp. The stream wasn't deep, but it ran fast, fed by hot springs further up the mountain. The sound of the rushing water would cover up any small noise he might make. The rocky banks on either side created natural blind spots, and Dren had to look down to watch his footing on the slippery stones. This was it. This was his chance. 30 yards, then 20, then 10. Dren was now ankle-deep in the water, carefully stepping from one slick rock to the next, his focus split between his footing and his scanner. 5 yards. Samuel pulled out the serrated knife he had taken. Dren must have heard something at the very last second, because he started to turn, his hand automatically reaching for his spear, but it was way too late. Samuel came at him from behind. He hooked one arm around the alien's neck, throwing him off balance, and plunged the knife up under its jaw, hitting the one spot where its thick hide was the thinnest. The blade tore through muscle and tissue, cutting something vital. They left him for dead on this alien rock, but they made one mistake. They left him with a knife. Now, one of their own was hunting him down, and Samuel was cornered. What would you do if the only way to survive was to become the monster they thought you were? Let me know your plan in the comments below, because what happened next was pure, desperate instinct. A sickening gurgle was the only sound Dren could make as Samuel held on, the alien's frantic struggles fading to nothing in just a few seconds. Silence fell over the stream. Samuel gently let the body go, the current pulling at it, washing away the dark blood in swirling ribbons. He wasn't a killer, but they had forced his hand. With cold efficiency born from pure survival, he grabbed the alien's spear and scanner, then crushed the communicator under his boot. He had a plan. He had spent the last 2 days not just hiding, but learning. He watched the local predators, studied how they killed, how they left their marks. And now he was about to create a masterpiece of deception. Using his simple knife, he carved new wounds into the body, perfectly mimicking the claw marks of the jungle's top predator. He tore the high-tech uniform just so, scattering the expensive gear to paint a picture of a violent, desperate struggle. Then he dragged the body into a shallow ditch, leaving it exactly how the creature would leave a half-eaten meal. It was a risky bluff, sure. A real forensic team would see through it in a heartbeat. But for a squad of overconfident hunters who wanted a simple explanation, it would be more than enough to send them looking in the wrong direction. Samuel rinsed his blade in the cool stream and vanished back into the shadows of the jungle, a ghost they themselves had created. And trust me, you are going to want to see what happens when they find the body. I've dropped a hint in that pinned comment down below. Oh, and before you go, if you enjoyed that twist, I've picked out another story with an even bigger one just for you. You can click the card right here to watch it now, or click over here to see the entire playlist. I will see you in the next one.